Prince of Botch in the building. Dwayne, the one and only, you already know. Welcome to yet another episode of the Life's a Botch podcast. Yes, I know you've missed me, Marks. I have missed you too, baby. It is so great to be back in the building. And you know what? It's been so much going on in wrestling, man, that I can't just talk about it by myself. I got to bring y'all guests. And you know what? Today is a first time guest. But how we gonna introduce this lady? I'm gonna show you how we gonna do it. This how we gonna do it right here. We gonna do this in a real special style because I did a lot of following up on this young lady and I know what she's got going on. So here's how we gonna do this, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, the following contest is scheduled for one fall.
Wonderful.
Introducing first, coming to you live from the West Coast. She is the voice with the most. Ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about none other than the queen of strong. Nope, sorry, the queen of soft style, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh,
She is
so
the
soft,
queen of
soft,
soft
soft.
style. And yo, you might know her from so much of chairshot.com. You may know her from quite a bit, actually, ladies and gentlemen. You also can even see her in a lot of different underground wrestling shows. You may have seen her in some of your local shows. There's a lot of things you can catch this lady on, but I am actually bringing her for the first time on this very show, so you'll get to know her a lot more on today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about none other than Miss Miranda Morales. What's going on?
Yay! I am so excited to be here. That is an amazing, amazing, amazing introduction. That has now the game has the gauntlet has been put forth, the game has been changed, the level has now risen
Come on.
of introductions for that. So
Yes. Yes.
not even in the first few minutes here, my mind is blown.
This is one of the things that makes your boy stand out on this show. Anytime we bring guests right here on this show, best believe they're gonna get the most epic intro that I could possibly give them. Why? Because baby, that's just what I'm known to do, man. I'm gonna try to get the energy set for everybody on the show, man. Have them feeling welcome, kick your shoes off, relax your feet, and let's just talk some cool wrestling. You know what I mean? Let's have some fun. You
Absolutely.
know, now,
Yeah.
of course, before we get into any wrestling, we got to talk to you. How's your week been? I mean, I know this has been like crazy, crazy. I mean,
Yes.
we didn't had a versus battle for my New York folks out there in the city. You know what I mean? We didn't had a wonderful week in wrestling. I mean, it's just been a
Yeah.
wonderful week in general. I mean, how have you been this week?
Oh man, I've been doing really well, and you're absolutely right. It's a very exciting time, both
Mm-hmm,
on the independent scene.
mm-hmm,
Wrestling is coming back on the local level.
mm-hmm.
Out here on the West Coast, it was kind of very hit or miss. Some states like Arizona, where I'm at, had been open for quite some time, but now we're starting to see more wrestling come out here and be active, and that then also comes into to play for nearby places like California and Nevada. Oregon and Washington are ramping up again. So seeing West Coast wrestling thrive is makes my heart sing. I love it. It
Yeah.
does also keep me quite busy on my weekends for announcing and interviewing, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And then on top of that,
Yeah.
on the week to week basis with what's happening out on the professional world,
Mm-hmm.
it keeps it very interesting for podcasting topics. It is a time where anything could happen,
Yeah.
and there's always a new story, a new, interesting tidbit every week. So when it comes to
Yes.
podcasting, as you definitely know, it
Yes.
keeps the content rolling. And if anything, it makes it hard to narrow down what you want to talk about, or what you want to focus on, because I think that that's a challenge I have. There's so much going on. Is what do you talk about? What do you focus on,
Yeah.
while also making it, you putting your spin on it, which I think that's a thing in podcasting. I think a lot of people take as an underrated, you know, form of preparation, and of podcasting is there's lots of podcasts. What do you do to make yours, unique and you and special?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that adds to, when you're preparing and picking your topics, what's important to you as a wrestling fan, and how do you convey that to listeners?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. It definitely takes a lot. And I mean, props to the ones out there who do it on their own, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because this is definitely, I know, a show that I don't have a co-host with. So every time I bring a guest on, it's kind of like they're my temporary co-host, if you
Yeah,
will. Like
I know.
I
I
have to,
I can't do
it's
it by
tough.
myself. I legit cannot do it. I always have to have someone else, because
Yeah.
it's more engaging with conversation, different perspectives,
Yes.
topics, like, and I think at the end of the day, that's one of the best things about, being a pro wrestling fan, is that there's so many perspectives and backgrounds and, fandoms, to have a conversation and to feel connected with someone that likes, the same thing you do. It feels
Yes.
rare still as a pro wrestling fan, even though there's fans all over,
Yes.
it still also feels like you're in your own little world.
Oh yes, absolutely. So let's get into the basics. Now that we got the introductions out of the way and all that good stuff, and we've been talking about wrestling. Before we get into what's cool about it, we want to get to know Miss Morales as the individual. So let's just start
Yes.
with the basic. Typical wrestling intros as we ask.
Yeah.
This is my segment, ladies and gentlemen, that I like to call "Put Me Over." You know what I mean? This is where we put over the
But
guest. You know what I mean? We putting over the guest,
yes.
and we gonna get a guest they flowers and they props straight up top. You know what I mean? So coming off the top rope right now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you, who is Miranda Morales? What brought you into the wrestling world? Who are you?
Oh. Well, me myself, Miranda Morales, I am a wrestling ring announcer, interviewer, and podcaster. And those have all come in different stages of life. They all didn't happen at once, they all have come in tiers.
Yes.
I guess the first one label, though, that I have is fan. I grew up watching wrestling as a kid in the late 90s and early 2000s. I witnessed the Monday Night Wars as a 10-year-old kid, and it just blew my mind. It was the most exciting time of wrestling for me. And I loved the characters. I loved, the animosity between rivals. I loved the difference in programming. I love storylines. That is where my heart sings in wrestling. I'm not much a technician in wrestling moveset and styles, but I love stories. I love characters.
Mhm.
And so that is what drew me to wrestling. And then I was a fan in and out for my teens and young adulthood. I came back, shortly after Eddie Guerrero passed away, and was very drawn to that storyline between Rey Mysterio and Randy Orton. I came back for a little bit with WrestleMania 26. When that came out here to the West Coast, I've been in and out of wrestling as a fan, but it wasn't until probably the past 5 years that I've been more ingrained in wrestling regularly. And then, as far as when that transition happened from fan to backstage interviewer, was my very first role in the independent scene. And I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time, and worked with a promotion called Destiny Wrestling Organization. And I met them at the Albuquerque Comic Con that was happening back in late, I want to say maybe super early 2017. And they had a table there. And at that point, I had gone to one of their shows previously, but didn't really know anything about independent wrestling. I really only knew the big WWE and WCW, ECW, and I really didn't know much about independent wrestling. So Destiny Wrestling Organization is to blame for my independent wrestling fandom, for bringing me into the fold. I came on almost just like as an intern, starting, at in just kind of whatever roles they needed. But I was a backstage interviewer for them. And then a few months into that, slowly transitioned into ring announcing. And I just fell in love with all of the production roles, filming and editing, and watching people edit, and watching, the development of promos and backstage vignettes. To me, that also spoke to my love of character development and storyline, seeing how those things are built in wrestling, from the production standpoint.
Yeah.
And then from there I came out here to Arizona and started working with more promotions. And then when the pandemic hit last year, I then took another role, another step in my career as a podcaster. I had actually been podcasting towards maybe about the end, somewhere around 2019, 2018.
Mhm.
So slowly, actually end of 2018, all of 2019, and then 2020 hit, and more podcasting opportunities came up. I started with thechairshot.com, which is ran by my, dear friend. I call him the kingpin of thechairshot.com, Greg DeMarco. He's the one who first gave me the opportunity to podcast with him and eventually do my own show.
Mhm.
And then opportunities started to come up with Big Gold Belt Media with Najir Chambers. Were both avid Impact Wrestling fans, and so started to work together on doing an Impact review. And then luchacentral.com revamped last year, and they have been a website dedicated to Lucha Libre for quite some time, but they launched their podcast network last year. And so I was brought on to co host one of their weekly shows, the Lucha Central Weekly Podcast. And that was like brand new territory for me. I knew of Lucha Libre. I had
Mhm.
heard of Lucha Libre. I knew of some luchadors as far as the big names,
Mhm.
but that definitely tested, my learning curve of a whole new style of pro wrestling.
Yes.
And that was, a big challenge. And it's still something that I'm learning a lot about because it's deeply rooted in culture and in family. Of course, it's, primarily dominant in Mexico and other places in Latin America. What we try and do on the Lucha Central Weekly podcast is bring it to a wider audience, a US audience, and really highlight, all promotions have a sprinkle of Lucha Libre in it, some more than
Yes.
others, but
Yes.
being able to showcase that talent, talk about that talent. And even, for some people, they get surprised about the Lucha Libre background of some wrestlers.
Mhm.
And, even more recently, I know everyone is celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and NXT Frankie Monet, who formerly go
Yes.
by Ty Valkyrie,
Yes.
spent 7 years in Mexico, has a lot of lucha libre training. And for those who
Yes.
are just familiar with her now, have no idea, but
No
she
idea.
has an extensive background. And so those little things are things that I really love to bring to the forefront and share and, celebrate with fans, as well as even the deep lineage of lucha libre. But yes, I mean, all these different roles had just kind of come about, and it's
Yes.
always been an evolution. But man, yeah, so constantly, as I talked about, like the weekends are full of announcing and the
Mhm.
weekdays are full of podcasting. But
I love
I
it.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Have it any other way because that was so amazing because as you mentioned as a fan, that's the beautiful part about what you do when you grow into certain things because I can relate to that. That's
Mhm.
definitely been me all the way as well, starting out as a fan, going and getting inspired to get into this podcasting
Yeah.
world because of some of the ones that I followed and listened to and really enjoyed and saying, you know what, yeah, let me get into this thing, and
Yeah.
finding ways to make the show unique to where it's different from what everybody else is doing, but still one of those where it's like people out there can listen and enjoy exactly the way we enjoy, and that is a very awesome thing. Shout out to Frankie Monet for sure, as you mentioned. She's
Yes.
got an NXT championship match in the future coming up her way.
Yes.
So shout out to Miss Frankie Monet for putting in that work always on the Lucha Libre. So I'm glad you brought that up because Lucha Libre, I know you said you were still learning a lot about that style, but I'm so glad you
Mhm.
brought that up because this show is also an educational show to some of my casual
Good.
fans out there,
Yeah.
or
Good to teach the audience
yeah,
more about pro wrestling.
exactly. There's a lot of fans out there. That's what really made me really inspired to do this show even more. It wasn't just off my own personal fandom, but it was also to school and educate a lot of people that I know who may not understand or get why I like wrestling as much as I do, why I love it as much as I do. So I'm here to bring them into our world a little bit and educate them on some things. So talk about Lucha Libre for a second and how it differentiates from the American style of wrestling. Because a lot of times people see, you got the South, the Deep South wrestling, where people see the showmanship, they see, the rock star like look and They see people, at least back in the day, not so much today, but back in the day, they
Mhm.
see the nice beefed up guys coming out, and giving you a showsmanship kind of thing where you're like, okay, this is clearly over the top. This is
Mhm.
clearly, what is it about this that you like so much? These characters, if you will. But
Yeah.
they don't understand that there's different styles and different cultures to this, to where in America, where some Americans may not necessarily get it, there are a lot who are fans that do, but to the
Mhm.
ones that don't get it and don't understand that certain cultures, certain countries, such as a Japan, a
Yeah.
Mexico, a UK, there's
Mhm.
certain countries that have their own style of wrestling
Yes.
and actually embrace the culture of wrestling a lot differently than how some of us in the United States do. So let's talk
Yes.
about Lucha Libre. Let's put Lucha Libre over for a second and tell the people what it is about Lucha Libre that should really make them want to tune in more into it.
Yeah. So Lucha Libre, as you mentioned, is part of like a wider worldwide phenomenon of pro wrestling. Wrestling in the US is different than what it is in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
than what it is in the UK, than what it is in Mexico. And Lucha Libre has a lot of the same basics and foundations as we see in wrestling in the United States. But there's definitely some differences, some tweaks and differences in match presentation, the actual wrestling itself, and much more. But in Lucha Libre, there's a bigger focus on the styles of a bit more fast paced and high flying with some luchadors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what a lot of people remember it by. But there's also a deeper sense of kind of brutality and hardcore. There's actually a really big, what I call more of a brawler style within Lucha Libre as well. And there's also now kind of a growing, more like hardcore aspect to it. And we've seen that with like GCW going down to Mexico doing more hardcore matches. They're a big fan of what we call the cookie sheets. That is something that can definitely be utilized in lucha libre matches. But yeah, so I would say that the style is fairly different with the performers, and then also their styles, a little bit louder and brighter. And of course, and one of the more famous aspects is the masks. Those are things that protect the identity of the wrestlers, and some of them have long family lineage of their masks that is part of a family name, or if they were maybe the son or a nephew of a luchador, then and who wore a mask, that comes through with the newer generation.
Yes.
So colors and mask designs are not just something for show, but they're actually a deeper tie into the family and culture of that lucha libre family. You still have the face and heel aspects in lucha libre. You call them technicals. Technical is the good guy, and rudo is the bad guy. So you still have those, but that is very apparent in your factions. They even have technical and rudo referees. So Tirantes and Tirantes Jr. are actually some of the most famous like heel referees
Mm-hmm.
that are very adamantly heel, and they're going to get involved in matches, but they still will do their job and count the three on a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also a very unique thing with the referees also having their own style and personality. Some promotions there have different rules. CMLL is famous for having a 3-fall system, whereas as you did the introduction here in the United States, we're very much used to a 1 fall. In
Mm-hmm.
CMLL and some other promotions, they will typically do 3 falls for many matches, and so that lengthens the match and it builds up that anticipation for the 3rd fall. A big emphasis on trios wrestling,
Yes.
which we've seen kind of trickle into the United States. It kind of seems
Yes.
to have fallen back a bit, but there was a big trend about 2 or 3 years ago where we had a huge surge in trios wrestling. And a
Yes.
lot of that really was developed in Mexico in the 70s and
Yes.
80s. And trios titles has been very familiar in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
That also and trios title, something that was very unique was the fact that women also competed a lot more often with men in Mexico. And so they were a part of intergender wrestling or trios matches where you had maybe two men and one woman on one
Mhm.
team and maybe three men on another. And I think that was because the women there are trained just as much and just as tough as the men.
Yes.
So I think those nuances, depending on if you like that or not, make lucha libre very interesting. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it's the high flying stunts and the high flying technical capabilities
Mhm.
of some of the luchadors is amazing. The characters are a little silly and over the top, but they're amazing. And then you have some pretty big tough guys, some big brawlers that can go with just about anybody in the entire world.
Mhm.
The and also within that culture, it is very much viewed as a sport. It is reported
Yes.
as a sport.
Yes.
It is viewed as just a way of life. But another interesting thing about that too is because it's taken so seriously, you have a lot more crossover with luchadors in, say, the quote unquote real world. So it
Mhm.
started a lot with, like, say, Demon and El Santo, where they were in movies back in the 70s, and they were more of
Mhm.
the campy movies, but they were some of the first crossover wrestling stars before The
Yes.
Rock, before Cena, before Hogan. You had
Mhm.
El Santo.
Yes.
And that also incorporated into real life, where you see them running for political office, for mayorships, and different types of roles where they own businesses and they're in the public eye with that luchador mask. So their identity with the mask on is truly what they use all the time. There is no fade, there is no, breaking down the reality of it. That is it all the time. So that's been a lot of what I've been learning about lucha libre. I know that's kind of an old, all over explanation, but I think that's because there's a lot of prongs in lucha libre that make it similar, but also very different than what we have here in the United States.
Oh no, yeah, that was amazing, amazingly laid out, and I just want to thank you for definitely giving as much of that history as you could, because again, this is definitely for the casual fan. Now, for me, also, I have Lucha Libre. The Lucha Libre style, honestly, was always one of my favorites growing up for some
Mhm.
reason. I really, you know, spoiler, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, clearly one of the greatest luchadors of all time, and Rey Mysterio, every
Yes.
childhood's favorite, right? A man who's still going very strong to this day. But
Mhm.
for me, watching Rey Mysterio was like probably my first introduction of like seeing guys like him, Psychosis,
Mhm.
La Parca,
Yeah.
like just all of these different, like I always thought the mass wrestlers were so cool. Like
Yeah.
and I and I don't know, I just had a thing for them, and I like how it was meant for them to kind of give off that superhero vibe. Like you always
Yeah.
wondered, like, what do they look like under that mask? I don't
Mhm.
know, but I like
Well,
it.
yeah, and their agility, their speed, the way,
Yes.
I mean, yeah, they did as much as you could look at any wrestler and feel the sense of, they are a superhero. I think
Yes.
with luchadors, there was a lot more of that tie because of the mask, because you
Yeah.
didn't know who they were. And that's a
Yes.
huge element for many superheroes, is you don't know who they are, and they have that
Yes.
wall protecting them from the rest of the world. And the
Yeah.
way that they move, you're absolutely right. Like,
Yeah.
definitely flashbacks to the WCW Cruiserweight division. I
Yes.
think for a lot of people, that was their introduction, many US fans, their introduction to luchadors. Or maybe it
Mhm.
was, uh, in the 90s with ECW, that too.
Yes.
That was
Yes.
something very undervalued that ECW brought to the table, was
Yes.
bringing in luchadors that eventually WCW stole anyways. But,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, but at the same time, it was that trickle effect. If we
yeah.
didn't have ECW bring them in, WCW wouldn't have brought them on board and had that cruiserweight division, which were what a lot of people, that was that first exposure for them
Hmm.
for lucha libre, and even wrestling in general. So I mean, I think there's always a cause and effect.
Yes.
And always kind of looking back at that history is very fascinating. Being on the other side of that, many years, from it, and seeing how it's impacted
Mhm.
companies now, like AEW,
Yes.
who definitely draw influence from that.
Yes, and it really shows because you mentioned the trios division, and I remember my first introduction to that was through another promotion that was around at the time, that had a nice rise for its era and its time, that was out in Lucha Underground.
Yes.
Lucha Underground introduced me because I remember hearing the rave about it, and I remember catching on to it, and really watching Lucha Underground, and just always having to catch every episode when they dropped a new season. And I remember it was through them I got introduced to what a trios title was. And as you mentioned, just being able to see the unique factor in how it put three men and stables on the map, but also, like you said, the women were mixed in this too. So as you mentioned, I kind of always thought that was an interesting aspect of, oh well, this side has two men and a woman, and this side has three men, or it's complete even playing field. You
Yes,
got
exactly. Yeah.
two women and two men, you got one woman and two men, on both sides, or maybe this side has all women and this side has all men. Like, it's
Yeah.
crazy, where a trios type of thing could just be anything. And I like to see the fact that it's actually making its way into wrestling. Rumors about it possibly making its way into AEW soon, we're hoping.
Yeah, that's definitely been a lingering rumor for quite some time, and I could see it. I
Yeah.
mean, they have the talent for it, and they've been building. I mean, AEW is they've been focusing a lot on, trios and factions and groups. Like everyone
Yes.
belongs to something. So
Yes.
you would be thinking, what does that structure mean in the big picture?
Hmm.
But going back to what you were saying about Lucha Underground, I mean that really was a Lucha Libre renaissance in the United States. It
It
really,
was.
I think, between the cruiserweight division and
Hmm.
then the next thing was really Lucha Underground, because it
Yes.
was cinematically beautiful. It was a
Yes.
TV show and a movie
Hmm.
and a wrestling show all in one. The talent that you got to see on there that really highlighted, luchadors from Mexico, but also from the past, from the future.
Hmm.
And it tied in, it just did a great job of braiding everything in, where, it played on the fact that, yeah, this is predetermined. This is,
Yes.
a story, but they leaned on that, and
Yes.
also leaned a little bit into that whole telenovela side of Latin culture, where you have these stories and they're kind of ridiculous and outrageous, and it, but you still watch it.
Yes.
And I think even a casual fan who would say, "Why are you watching that? That's not real," would look
Hmm.
at Lucha Underground and say, "This isn't real, but this is fascinating. This is good. This
Yes.
gets my interest."
Yes.
And I think that made lucha just very cool, because it was darker and deeper and just kind of off the wall. But you see a who's who from Lucha Underground now in AEW, in WWE, and even
Yes.
all over, in MLW, a impact. I mean, they've
Hmm.
all had their different roads to cross, but a lot of
Yes.
that was just because of the fact that that show was so good, and it was such a very it was just a different presentation of wrestling, period.
It was. It totally was. And I'm glad, speaking of Impact, that was another one I wanted to touch on with you, because much like you guys, I am also a very big Impact fan. Been an Impact fan really since its TNA days,
Yeah.
way back in the day. And I, for one, I'm proud of Impact for what they continually do and what they've
Hmm.
done, to stay around, and how they've like managed to rebrand themselves very low key in a way,
Hmm.
that a lot of people, while they probably slept on them after being so big at one point where it almost
Yeah.
rivaled WWE, to where it kind of had its decline, and people thought it was going to hit a level where it was just going to go out of business, with all those rumors of
Hmm.
bankrupt or not being able to pay their talents. And then next thing you know, all different ownerships aside, they've quietly just still been around, rebranded, and to this day have shown you that it's a platform still for indie talent to come showcase themselves. We've seen recently that with all of the releases from WWE within this year and mid last year of the pandemic, we've seen talent now just spread across from promotion to promotion, where
Hmm.
Impact has managed to get a bunch of different guys like a Matt Cardona or guys like that, a big Cass XL,
Hmm.
just a bunch of different people who have come through and had a chance to re-platform themselves on this platform. What brought you into the world of Impact Wrestling? Like, how'd you get introduced to Impact Wrestling?
Yeah. I would say that I've also been kind of in and out of Impact for a few years. I remember watching it when they were on Spike
Mm-hmm.
TV. And so once they left, it was hard to kind of keep track of them because they jumped around to from, lots of different television networks. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that too was a challenge of, not having a stable, uh, you know, way of being able to view it on television. And then
Mm-hmm.
they moved over to Twitch, and that slowly became a good anchor for them.
Yeah.
So I'd say been in and out, but I've really been more invested in Impact over the about the past 2 years.
Yes.
And this was leading up to the 2020 Hard to Kill show
Mm-hmm.
that they had in Dallas at the beginning of last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my very first live Impact event, actually. And so in being able to be there and seeing the matches and the talent at that point of time was fascinating. But I think that it was challenging to stay on board with Impact because of all the changes. But what I did end up appreciating is that they really did have a true passion for wrestling,
Yes.
and they could do silly stuff, which at the end of the day, I love silly stuff. I love, like, Wrestle House was like one of my favorite things from
Yes.
last year. It was silly and kind of dumb, but like I also love that. So I feel
Yeah.
like Impact in and of itself now especially owns to the fact that it's a little meta. Like, they
Yeah.
own the fact that, yeah, we can be silly and we
Mm-hmm.
could be dumb, and
Mm-hmm.
we're also making fun of the wrestling business. And but we can also have some of the best wrestling talent in the world. We could also have some of the best wrestling matches out there. We could
Yes.
also have a very strong knockouts women's division,
Yes.
and you could do both. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, I feel like sometimes they can lean on one more over the other, and some shows they're a lot more wrestling driven, which is good, but maybe not as exciting and entertaining to watch on a storyline side. Other times they'll really rely on story and vignettes, and that's great, but then you want to see some wrestling because the talent they have is good. So I would really say a lot of things leading up to Hard to Kill, and really at that time too, that program, that rivalry between Tessa Blanchard and Sammy Callahan, was
Yes.
fascinating to me. you
Yes.
know Regardless of what you want to say or think about the whole scenario, it was really
Mhm.
revolutionary and groundbreaking at that time to have a woman compete for a world championship.
Yes.
And when she won, I mean, it was an electric feeling in that arena that night. And it was a big stride for Impact, which one thing they have done for
Yes.
many, many years is present women's wrestling in a different format, of course, with the Knockouts division. But they were the first to have an all women's pay per view. They've
Yeah.
had, one of the first to do women's cage matches
Mm-hmm.
and, stipulation matches. And then to have, Tessa win that championship, leaning into the fact that they really showcase women in a light where they can compete with the men and they can have the
Yes.
same opportunities. Diana Praso right now is their biggest star, really. I mean, top
Yes.
three biggest stars in the entire company.
Shining.
One wrestler of the year for 2020.
Yes.
So
She's
I
shining.
do feel like that's something very unique. And I feel
Yes.
like in wrestling, I can appreciate any company that comes in with a unique spin or just kind of a unique philosophy to pro wrestling.
Yes.
And MLW does it a little different, where they're much more of that hybrid, like multiple fighting styles in one
Mm-hmm.
company.
Mm-hmm.
That's something very unique that I can appreciate.
Yes.
So those I try and find the best out of promotions, because I don't tend to bash any of them. There's things, of course, I don't like about promotions and what they do,
Hmm.
but I think at the end of the day, I'm always trying to pull the good out of it. And I think
Uh,
from Impact, those were the things that really drew me to being a regular fan.
yes. Yeah. And I totally agree. With all these promotions, it's tough to, for one, as fans, it's tough for us to keep up with all of them because
Yes.
so much
So
wrestling. You're
hard,
like,
so much
man,
content
how can I
every
get it
week.
right? You're like, how can I get invested when I want, like because NWA, for example,
Yes.
with its retro 80s feel to it,
Yes.
right? And how you're getting that throwback with current talent feel to it, and it's amazing, so where you see all these promotions everywhere doing something different, something to bring their hardcore fan base. I think what's really awesome about today's era is the fact that we actually have true alternatives now.
Hmm.
Where at one
Yeah.
point, uh, as you mentioned earlier, you had the Monday Night Wars in our time, where it was WWF, it was WCW. Okay, your two meccas. We didn't know about
Yeah.
the independent scene. We didn't know, oh, there's an independent underground wrestling beyond these two. We just knew
Hmm.
these as the two promotions on television that we could watch every single week. Cool. Then it was a matter of, well, which one of these two do I want to watch? Who do I like better, right? Or you were probably a fan like me. You were like, I want to support both of them, so I'm just gonna go back and forth from
Yeah.
time to time, right? I'm gonna do that.
I did that. Yeah.
Yeah, why not? And then we lose WCW just like that.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, all we have is the WWF. And I do remember as a kid from time to time, there were like indie promotions that would come on like really, really, really late at night where it was like,
Hmm.
hey, this is wrestling, but this isn't WWE. What is
Yeah.
this? Like Wow Women of Wrestling.
Hmm.
I remember that from back in the day where it was like, oh, and I saw that they made their comeback as well, and they brought that back from a time when it had a hiatus, and then they ended up bringing that back down the line. But it was just so many different things I came across because I always thought, wow, women of wrestling was interesting to me as a kid because I was like, well, this is like literally all women. I was like, there's not a single guy in
Yeah.
here. I was like, this is interesting. And I was invested in that because I was
Yeah.
like, I had never seen the women wrestle like that before. Like WWE did it, but it was kind of like gimmicky. It was the sex
Yeah.
appeal effect.
Oh yeah. They didn't really get serious about it until,
So like yeah,
5 years ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you had
Yeah.
you
You
had
did.
your Trish and Lita's and Molly Hollies, and
Hmm.
there were like women from the Attitude Era that definitely tried their best to give you wrestling matches
Yes.
with what they had. But even then, they
Yes.
still had to add sex appeal to it for the most part. But like, Wow Women
Hmm.
of Wrestling was one of those things where
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, this is like legit women that are beautiful, but they're actually wrestling. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they also really took the element of your character, because everything was very,
yes,
gimmicky, but I think that helped in,
yes,
getting invested in people, because you had characters, they
yes,
were very clear cut on who they were. And,
yes,
I definitely appreciate, because to me, it's one thing to, go out into the ring and wrestle great, but how do you connect with fans? By your personality, by what you
yes,
display.
yes,
And they always did such a fun job of that too. I think they also leaned into the fact that we knew it was predetermined, and we knew this wasn't, necessarily like any other sport, but because of that, you could have fun with it. And I think
yes.
WoW really was something that was super fun to watch.
It really was. And again, I was just so happy to see it make its return a few
Mhm.
years back when they brought it back. I was like, yes, okay, I do
Yeah.
remember that show. That's a show I remember. So as a fan though, let me ask you for sure, what is it like being a woman fan in wrestling? Especially what was that like for you growing up? Like, were you that person? Did you have other fellow lady friends or guy, or were you with the guys if you knew they were wrestling fans too, and you were just like the one girl in the crew that she's a wrestling fan too, she knows her stuff. Like, what was it like for you as a woman being a wrestling fan?
Yeah. Growing up, there were no other girls that I knew who liked wrestling. So I was in a
Wow.
very small group
Mhm.
of guy friends. And at this time too, like at this age, I was a pretty big tomboy, like all
Mhm.
over. I dressed like a boy. I hung out with boys. So
Yeah.
that was something that was, pretty normal for me. As I grew up and I, had more friends and I stopped watching wrestling, it definitely didn't impact my circle of friends. But
Mhm.
it wasn't until later on in life where I definitely saw a pretty big kind of schism in my worlds with that,
Mhm.
because to this day I don't have any like personal friends of mine
Mhm.
who are wrestling fans. And for my girlfriends, when I talk to them about it, about what I do, they're still just fascinated, like, you do what and you go where, and like they just telling them a little bit about the wrestling world and even just what I watch on a weekly basis is still mind blowing for them to be like, how do you do this? Why do you do this? But it has been awesome, and I contribute this to podcasting,
Yes.
being able to see a lot more women podcasting and doing their thing. Like, I love seeing all these different women from different parts of the United States and walks of life being able to get onto a microphone and talk about wrestling, talk about what they like and what they don't, and having a voice. And it makes me feel connected in ways that I don't, because I still don't have female friends
Yeah.
that are wrestling fans. Whenever I, listen to a podcast or a video clip, I feel like, you know, they could be my friend. And
Yeah.
I know this is kind of strange and kind of creepy, but it's like, it feels like I'm just sitting and listening to a conversation of friends
Yes.
talking about podcasting. So, so for me, seeing the growth and the amount of female podcasters out there,
Mhm.
that is the best thing. And that truly makes me feel very connected. I also love the opportunity when I get to work with, other women, especially women's wrestlers,
Mhm.
in the ring, and just like being able to announce for them and having those female shows. I have announced for Future Stars of Wrestling, based out of Las Vegas, and they will do these kind of quarterly shows for Future Stars of Women's Wrestling that just focus on the women. And those are some of my favorite shows because they bring in talent from all over, but it's just a focus on the women. And it's a different vibe, it's a different openness, it's just this ability to want to help each other and commit to like everyone doing their part. And then I just want to make sure I announce and do everyone their justice, and like make sure that they are getting the best entrance possible because they deserve that.
Yes.
And so I think that just being able to also see what women go through in the wrestling world, whether you're a wrestler or a commentator or a referee, it can be a challenge. It's a challenge to be taken seriously,
Mhm.
because of the fact that the bar is always going to look different for women, and they're going to be measured differently. They're going to be viewed differently. And even in all the great strides and opportunities that have come up, it's always going to be different. And so being able to kind of embrace that and make it your own and have the best time that you can have with it. But it definitely, when I announce for a women's match or especially a women's show, I really make it my best to like put in all my effort just to make sure I give them that justice of their entrance, because I want it to be that much more special for everyone.
I love it. I love it. That is awesome. And that's the perfect transition. What the basis of what I wanted to chat with you about is you are a ring announcer, and of course, with that comes a lot of responsibility, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What was that like for you transitioning into that world? Like talk to people who may feel like, everything always seems easy off sight, right? When you see it, you're like, oh, I could do that, right? I could be a referee in a ring. I could be a ring announcer. That's something I could do. Like, I probably can't do. Sometimes people even think they could be a wrestler off top just watching. But we've
Yeah.
we've had we've had shows like Tough Enough, thank goodness, and
Yes.
and different things that have shown, there's still some people that still, for whatever reason, feel they could do it until you're like, oh, okay, go in there if you
Yeah,
want to.
yeah, yeah.
Run the ropes
Be
and
my
look,
guest. Yeah.
you think that's easy. Okay, go ahead. But talk to the people about the life of a ring announcer. Like,
Yeah.
how much preparation really goes into being that?
Well, I know my preparation, varies, but also is definitely a little different. I know that the best ring announcers are the ones that prepare, and there's so many that I admired, but going back to kind of how the transition started is that I was a backstage interviewer with Destiny Wrestling, and then they said, we'd like to have you start coming up front and announcing matches. So I tag teamed some announcing with one of my mentors, Adam Merrick, who was the primary ring announcer. He was also though serving in an authoritative role within DWO2. So they also wanted to kind of create a little bit more of a line too, where his role was a little bit more, managerial, or just more administrative,
Mm-hmm.
and have me do some of those matches, just general matches. So at first, that to me though was one of the best ways I could have transitioned, because I wasn't just thrown into a whole show by myself. I was able to observe and talk with Adam and get a sense of what to do, and for me it was just a lot of observing, a lot of listening, and getting that feedback from people. There's a big thing as far as preparation, where some people, are you a cards person or are you not a cards person? I originally was not a card person, but that's only because I announced maybe 3 or 4 matches out of a whole show.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, when I started to announce more, announcing full shows, I became a card person, and I got older and I needed to, but prepping your cards, having what of course would want to wear, but also trying to get an understanding of what your show is,
Mm-hmm.
getting a vibe, especially if this is maybe your first time announcing for a particular promotion, understanding who they are. I try and match myself to what the vibe and the environment of that promotion is,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's how I sound, what I dress like, my notes and things like that.
Yeah.
Those are things that I like to do, because I, at the end of the day, and even historically, the ring announcer is the face of the show.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the promoters used to be the ring announcers, or bookers used to be ring announcers. So a lot of times that was the face of the company, was the ring announcer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a historical context, but people would come up to me asking me questions about the show, or certain things about merchandising, and other things that I wouldn't necessarily know about. But as the face, a person in the middle of the ring telling you what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
that's an assumption that I'd have to take on. So even understanding the details about the events of merchandising, who's there, what are the big names on the card, what do you want to have emphasized, really having the communication with the promotion as well,
Mm-hmm.
to what I try and do is, be very flexible about my approach and say, how do you, what are some of the big things you want to make sure I hit on tonight? What are some of the, big names and mentions of sponsors, all of that?
Yes.
Those are important for promotions to convey, and the ring announcer does all of that. And then there's the voice part, which was something I still work on, and I wouldn't say struggle with, but it's also evolving. The way that I sound now is very different than what I sounded in the beginning, and that was listening to people that I admired. Growing up, I did listen a lot to Howard Finkel, and I sounded
Yes.
a bit like him, until someone pointed that out, and they said, you know what, change your direction a little bit, and go a little bit richer. And of course, growing up, listening to Lillian Garcia, she was the reason
Yes.
why I could even think of myself as a ring announcer, because of her.
Yes.
But
Yes.
then when I got to look a little bit more like at Lucha Underground, Melissa Santos became what I wanted to be. The
Yes.
look, the sound, the
Yes.
mystery, the beauty, like That
Yes.
is the ideal. But even seeing like Shao Guerrero, who did it for a while and
Mhm.
for other promotions, she had a little bit too of a grittiness, a little punk rock to her that I
Yeah.
loved. Even Christy Hemme in
Ah,
Impact, I love the
yes.
way that she smiles, her facial expressions. I'm not the best
Hmm.
I like bright facial expressions. I'm a little bit more serious tone,
Hmm.
but I love watching her facial expression. So looking at
Yeah.
people in little different ways. Of course, the Buffer brothers. I mean, the grandness, that's something I kind of took over for my main event announcements, trying to be bigger and larger in my sound for
Hmm.
main event announcements. And it's picking those things. And I think that was what I learned too, is picking. I don't have to be exactly like anybody, but
Hmm.
if there's things that I like from people, let me pick from that and try that. And,
Hmm.
and that's something that I briefly have met Justin Roberts a few times.
Yes.
And the very first time I met him, I asked, how did you figure out your sound? And he said, watch yourself, watch yourself, watch yourself. You have to be able to listen to yourself and see what you like and see what you don't,
Hmm.
and create your own. He's like, you don't have to be anybody else except yourself.
Hmm.
And AJ Kirsch, who's rings announced and has done commentary. He also had some great points about, picking when to interact with the crowd. You don't want to
Hmm.
drain the crowd of the energy that they need to devote to the match. Pick and choose your moments. So I think too, being able to get those little pieces of information from people,
Hmm.
sum up, what my sound is and what I'm trying to do. And even in how I prepare those
Yeah.
things, practicing introductions, always constantly just trying to keep a warm voice about it. So it's a
Mhm.
lot,
It
everyone does
is.
it differently. Everyone does it differently.
I love
But
it.
to me, it's all the little components that you have to do when you're in that ring
Yeah.
that ends up taking the time in preparation.
Man, I'm telling you, you see that right there says so much. I see this is why I love this platform. This is why I love this show because being able to talk to people who do different things. I had a chance on the show to interview with the referee before to explain to the people what it's like being in the ring as a ref. And to speak with someone who does ring announcing and backstage interviewing because we will get to
Mhm.
that in a second as well.
Yeah.
But that ring announcing aspect, man, it's just there's so much epic to that, where even my guy in the boxing world that we know the let's get
That's
ready to rumble, like even when you hear just some of these iconic voices, you always think of something so epic. As you mentioned, I never really quite thought about that in terms of ring announcers being the face of it like that because it's
Mhm.
crazy, really. Because I think about when I'm at these events, you know what? You're right. That ring announcer sets the tone of how the
Yes.
show is going to go. Like I
Yes.
know we talk about the fans. Yeah, of course, the fans got the energy. We know they're going to bring the energy because they're hyped to be at the show. But that ring announcer is the one that controls the
Exactly.
crowd.
Yeah,
Um,
they set the tone for the entire event. They can set the tone for the upcoming match. They can
yeah,
direct attention away when maybe something is you got to stretch your time a bit, and
yeah.
so there definitely can feel like a lot of pressure of wanting to do good because you want to do good for the promotion, for the wrestlers,
Mhm.
when the wrestlers come out, like they can get hype off of your introduction. And I've had
Yes.
several wrestlers reach out like, man, when you announce me, it gets me hype, or finding the right time too, looking at them and their movements and trying to
Mm.
time up their, because sometimes that happens. Again, every promotion's different, but
Mhm.
when I can draw out an introduction to kind of hit a certain pose or a movement,
Mhm.
that's something someone taught me about, hey, if you get the chance, time up your introduction to the pose so that when they do their pose, you're finishing up the introduction. And
Mhm.
depending on, some promoters or some promotions may say, go ahead and introduce them, then they'll come out, or in, whatever it is. But I also think there is a lot of flexibility that has to be involved. So
Mhm.
that way you can match what, where you're at. But you also have to think on the fly sometimes. Things may not, go right, or you may have a flub and you just got to get over it and move on to the next thing. So they,
Love it.
it involves a lot of flexibility. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. They can set the tone for the night, for the match, for what's happening. And so I always just want to do my best to do it justice, because every promotion deserves that.
Yes, it really, really does. And I love it, man. I just, and it was crazy because you mentioned a lot of dope names in the ring announcing world that I was gonna ask you about. I was gonna be like,
Mhm.
who were your inspirations? Who
Yes.
were, I might ask you a little later to give me a top five there if you can. If
Yes.
it may be tough, I don't know, but I may
It'd be
ask you
tough.
about that. I
Yes.
may ask you to give me a top five on that. But nonetheless, let's segue real quick to life of a backstage interviewer. I kind of
Mhm.
did this a little backwards because usually, as you mentioned, I have noticed where a lot of ring announcers do start off in the
Mhm.
backstage interview style.
Yeah.
But then, we see that they make their way, obviously to the ring. So I would ask you, like, of the two, which do you say you enjoy the most between the
Gosh.
two?
That's hard, because I would say that I feel a little bit more organic or natural as a backstage interviewer. And that's
Mm,
just because I'm a natural talker. I like to ask questions. Very inquisitive. I like to be a foil for people. And that's kind of how I see, my role as an interviewer is,
mm,
I'm here to help convey a point, a message, a story. And how do I do that with this person? So what can I ask? How can I portray myself? What can my nonverbal cues or verbal cues be in order to help portray that, to help connect the dots for people? And so for me, it takes a different line of thinking, but I would say that it comes a little bit more natural to me to do interviewing. And that, I would say, ring announcing has been harder to pick up and harder to learn and
wow.
harder to kind of feel a groove in,
Mhm.
because a lot of it is a little bit more dictated by, here's your structure. It's a bit more structured, I think, in ring announcing. And
Yeah.
then you really have to utilize your voice to help convey. And of course, you can play around with your words and things like that.
Mhm.
Whereas interviewing, there's a lot more liberties that you can take, and you can be a more creative, and you can think a little bit more outside of the box.
Yes.
And I think it could be a lot funner, and it gives you that one-on-one with a wrestler or a team or a group.
Yes.
And you can have a little bit more personality. So I would say that it comes a little bit more naturally to me,
Mhm.
but I don't get to do it as much either, because of the fact that not all promotions utilize interviewers.
Mhm.
And so I'd say that I have a lot more, notches under my belt in ring announcing at this point.
Mhm.
But if I could do more interviewing, backstage interviewing or on stage interviewing, I would love that as
Love
well, just
that.
because it's, it's a different role, but I think one that's more creative and one that you can, have a little bit more fun with.
Mhm.
And you are helping telling a larger story as an
Yeah.
interviewer too.
Yeah, and I had to ask that question because what really made me just think about it as I was asking you that question you were answering, I realized that there were a lot of personalities that did backstage interviewing that never really ended up doing ring announcing, such as
Mhm.
a Mean Gene Okerlund, for
Yeah.
example.
I mean,
Um,
Mean Gene, yeah, his role was always very specific as an interviewer, but
yeah.
I mean, he's legendary in the fact that,
Mhm.
I've been watching a lot more like late 90s, well, mid to late 90s WCW. So like 96
Mhm.
WCW.
Yeah.
And they really incorporated Mean Gene in multiple points of the show.
Mhm.
And he was always straight to the point. He was,
Mhm.
able to cut through
Mhm.
the BS a little bit. He was
Yeah.
able to help connect the dots. He was able to help set up, the right lines and the right timing.
Mhm.
And I think he's still the best at it. When I
Mhm.
really look at interviewers, to me, he was the best at doing that.
Yes, I totally agree. And Renee Young was another that came
Yes.
to my mind because she was arguably one of the most talented personalities within the WWE in terms of
Mhm.
being able to do. We saw her become the first female commentator on Raw, of course, and being able to do that on a regular basis. But you know, one of those that didn't really have to do the ring announcing per se. She
No,
literally
she
could
she
just,
really didn't. I love her interviews. Her
yeah.
lengthier interviews is where I think she was able to display some of the smartest thinking and
Mm-hmm.
delivery. I think whereas
Mm-hmm.
Mean Gene was really good at the very quick questions, here's your question, your little interview right before a match. I really liked her. I really liked Renee's lengthier
Yeah.
interviews and
Yeah.
ones that and because I feel like she did such a great job of being able to ask the right questions in a
Mm-hmm.
way that seems not even just professional but very smart. You
Mm-hmm.
felt like you were watching like 2020.
Yeah.
You were watching like something that for wrestling you didn't really expect. And I
Yeah.
think that too, her role and her experience in broadcasting and podcasting, like I feel like the way that she puts together an interview is what the really one of the best, if not the best, and just one of my personal favorites in wrestling.
I love it, man. I love it. That is awesome. So, now that we really get the base of what it takes and what's the type of advice that just off of the experience you have so far, to that person out there that is, let's say, an up and coming wrestling fan, or someone that's just getting into this, a little bit, or maybe they've been into wrestling, they've been a hardcore fan, but they want to try to get into the business. Maybe they know, like, okay, I'm not fit to actually wrestle in the ring, but I know I can offer this. What would you
Mhm.
say to somebody that wants to be a backstage interviewer, like a Renee Young or a Mean Gene or
Mhm.
a Miranda Morales?
Yeah.
You know, what would you say to that individual that wants to be that ring announcer that's out there and like, man, listen, I got a swag like no other. I'll come out there looking good and fly, being able to just give you the best introduction you could ever have. Like, what do you say
Yeah.
to 1A and 1B as far as what they want to do and how they can start getting into the business?
Yeah. Well, I know, like I said, my story started by just getting connected with a local independent wrestling promotion. And so that would be something that, I would recommend is if you have one nearby, reaching out to them and letting them know that you are interested in a role with them. Sometimes they're in need of that role and sometimes they're not. So you have kind of two different scenarios too that you can come up across where
Mhm.
one, they're going to be very open and say, hey, sure, come on by to our next show, or maybe come by while we're doing training.
Mhm.
I know I kind of had a little mini interview with one of the promoters even prior to being on board so that they could know me a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so I feel like any opportunity to like have a sit down conversation with a promotion or a team, someone
Mhm.
within the wrestling world to talk a little bit more about yourself and your background, one, humanizes the whole experience, but two, those especially in the business who can pick up on something unique about someone's background, that could be that trigger for them that says you would be great in this role or you would be great in this role. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's the role that you're thinking of and sometimes it's not the role that you're thinking of too. So I think being open to things. I've seen so many people who started off as ring crew, as sound, as just setup, and who have evolved into referees and
Mhm.
wrestlers, because they
Mhm.
started off at there. And I think that is a whole part of the wrestling experience is a lot of people will start off in kind of a more basic role, but that's also one so you could see the in and outs and understand the larger scale of what wrestling is and what it can be. And then when you have that opportunity to jump in and do something, a lot of times it's just the right opportunity, the right time, being at the perfect
Yes.
place at the perfect time.
Love it.
But also thinking about, practicing. If you find wrestlers or even your friends to practice interviews with, I've done that just on the spot. Like
Mhm.
when I'm talking with people, I'll like set up an interview and just start asking questions as an interviewer. It's for more for fun, but I think that too, if you are learning or trying to get into that, the more practice you have and what I call a rep, the more reps you have,
Mhm.
the better. And then also studying people that you admire. And for me personally, it's not about trying to act exactly like them, but looking at the things that they do. And like just as if it's you're a football player studying tape, or you're an actor studying film.
Yeah.
If you want to be an interviewer or a ring announcer, studying people that you admire, and maybe starting off with places or time frames that you grew up in, but also getting out of your comfort zone and maybe watching someone in a promotion that you haven't watched so much, or in a time frame or an era that you're not so used to
Yeah.
kind of just see differences with people, because it is very different. The ring announcing from the 70s and 80s and even early 90s is very direct, very straightforward, talking about like mid-south, like
Yeah.
like very much is just straightforward. This is who's in the ring, but they were clear, they were
Mhm.
concise, and people could hear them. And that's also another element that I also struggle with, is when you play around with your voice too much, you
Mhm.
can lose, the clarity of what you're trying to say. So I think too, just trying to figure out who you want to be. I think now and announcing, it's a lot more larger than life, but it helps you find your voice. And same thing with interviewing, finding your tone. I think conciseness is important in constructing interview questions. And you don't want to be too dragged out, but you also want to get to a point where you're roping people in with the right set um, of words. And
Yes.
so, yeah, definitely working with independent promotions is great. And if there isn't anyone near you, you're trying to find, if it what lengths are you willing to go? Are you willing to travel to work with a promotion? Are you willing to, maybe do something a little different, where you do, instead of backstage interviewing, decide to do a podcast because you don't have any promotions near you,
Mhm.
or maybe approach a promotion and say, hey, I wouldn't mind doing, virtual interviews. And that way you could post to social, whatever it may be. Like, I
Mhm.
think that too. I think that's another big thing with social media now, is that interviews are no longer just what you see in, filmed backstage or in a ring. Social media has played a huge part in having interviews done. MLW
Yes.
has done that with Alicia too. Like, that's
Yeah.
a big element of what they've done in between when they're not airing episodes of Fusion, is
Mhm.
she's, set the stage for interviews that then go into storyline virtually.
Mhm.
And I think that helps, bridge that gap. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunities and ways for people to get involved. But I think it's, trying to you have to be outgoing, you have to go out there and fight for it and find it, because it
Mhm.
may not always find you. And then be ready to sell yourself. What do you bring to the table? And what are you able to commit? Because it may be long hours and not a lot of pay if you do get paid at first, but you also have to figure out, at what point, what are you also willing to sacrifice, and what what is worth it to you.
Yeah.
Because I do also believe people should be paid for their time and their value, and especially if you're more of a multi-talented person, like, not just on the mic, but if you can produce stuff, if you can do AV, if you can do sound,
Mhm.
those are all things too that as will help, whether you do podcasting or working with a promotion. So I think too, the more you learn about different roles, the more of a utility player you can be. But
Yeah.
those are just kind of some insights and some tips for anyone who's looking to get into those roles.
Man, I love it. That was so amazing. Miranda, you are such an awesome and phenomenal individual. And
Thank
thank
you.
you just so much for your time with us,
Oh,
because you've really given a lot of insight, not just to myself, the host, but you've given insight to my casual listeners out there, to my
there
hardcore
you
listeners
go.
out there.
Yes, we
Yeah,
try and give the whole
yeah,
array of
yeah, you
people who may be listening.
we giving it for you all, you know what I'm saying? Because again, I got people out there who listen to me, man. They supporting just me, the person behind the mic. And they may not
Yes,
get wrestling the way I do, but they still listen because they intrigued by, well, yours truly and this personality that your
of
boy carries.
course.
But also they're supporting just to be like, man, let me see what it is that this guy really likes to have to make this a show. And now
Mhm.
you're getting led into my world, ladies and gentlemen. You're getting understanding right here on the Life's a Botch podcast, where I let you guys know it's not about how you botch. It's not about the fact that you botch. It's what you did with your botch and how you make
Yeah.
it work in life, ladies and gentlemen. So I got to do a quick little segment with you that's going to be real fun. Okay. It's a
Okay.
quick little segment that I call Babyface or Heel. Okay. Ladies and
Ooh.
gentlemen, this is sponsored by the following show on Stars. You can catch it on Stars every Sunday. Ladies and gentlemen, none other than Heels, sponsors
Ooh,
this very
yes.
segment. Actually, I'm just playing. I'm
Dang. I
just
was gonna
playing right now. I wish,
say.
hey,
Hey, you put it out into the universe.
putting it out
This
in the
is a good, but
universe.
this is a good. If I feel like I know where you're going, this
Yeah.
is actually a good game that ties into the show. So
Yeah,
that's some smart
yeah,
thinking.
yeah. You know what I'm saying? Hey, this is something that your boy did first. So y'all know where I got it from. But Heels, if you're listening, producers of Heels, all that good stuff. Yeah, come sponsor your boy on the podcast, so
Come
that
and
way I can
find you.
always,
Come and get him.
come get
Yes.
me. We can do this. So you guys personally are the sponsors of this here segment. But Babyface or Heel is basically a quick little fun show that I do for the fans with a guest, where basically the scenario is exactly the way it sounds. I just bring some stuff out, throw it out to you, and you choose if you're gonna go babyface on the scenario or
Oh,
if you're gonna go heel with it. The
this will be
heel.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, so we just, since it's been such a crazy wrestling week, or wrestling month for that
Yes.
matter, heck, a wrestling year. We're not even really done with 2021 yet. I'm gonna just go ahead and throw some stuff out, and I just, feel free to go babyface on it or heel, whichever you choose. All right, you ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay, okay. So let's start with something very recent. Ladies and gentlemen, we witnessed history on Monday night, ladies and gentlemen, when we saw none other than Big E become the WWE champion for the first time in his career, defeating another first time WWE champion and Bobby Lashley. So, are you going babyface or heel on the timing of this segment?
Ooh. The timing. I think that's an opportune word. It's hard to not feel good about the entire thing. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna go babyface. Like it's just at the end of the day, it doesn't, as much as there could be so much critiques about, oh, they should have waited longer, they could have done this, you didn't have to plan it
Mhm.
out. The
Yeah.
moment that it happened was worth it. And that's at the end of the day what I think everybody remembers. And that's what makes everyone feel good about it, is that it happened. People were happy, people were joyous.
Mhm.
And so it's hard to not feel anything but babyface for the win and everything about it.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Okay, okay. I see where you're going there. Okay, we're gonna keep this dollar rolling. We're gonna see what happens. Uh, all right. So let's backtrack to one of arguably, actually, no, you know what? Let's just put this pay-per-view out. I'm just gonna say this whole pay-per-view
Okay.
right now. I was gonna just do one match, but you know what? I'll do the whole pay-per-view. Ladies and gentlemen, AEW All Out.
Oh, wow.
Babyface or heel, is this or was this the greatest wrestling pay-per-view of all time?
Best wrestling pay-per-view of all time. You know what?
I got you.
I'm gonna have to go heel on this, just because
Ooh!
I know this is controversial. This is controversial.
Yes, she's
Best
giving
of
me the
all
controversy.
time? No. It's
Ooh.
hard to do that, just because there's others in historical sense
Mhm,
that you look at, like your WrestleMania 3s, like your
mhm,
Bash at the Beach 96,
mhm,
like your WrestleMania 30s, that you look
mhm,
at a historical context and you're thinking, man, that was the best. Now, what I say is it definitely the best within, this decade,
mhm,
definitely up there. But of
mhm.
all time, I cannot, with my pure heart, say that at this time. Maybe in 10 years, we'll look
Mhm,
back at it and see, how much did All Out have an impact on the wrestling world as we know it. But
mhm.
knowing, wrestling now and all these other events that have had just really a transcending effect on wrestling, I can't say
Yes.
best pay-per-view of all time.
See, I love it. I love it. See, that's what you gave me, my first one of the day. That's what I love it. See, I love when
Yes.
they switch up on me and it's not always babyface. You did it, Miranda.
Oh
You
no,
did it.
no.
I love it.
I can only say the truth.
You're
That is
keeping it.
that is
Yes.
my fatal flaw.
Yes, keeping true to the gimmick, ladies and gentlemen. That's what you got to do. You got to keep true to the gimmick. Which one we gonna go with? So, okay, I'm gonna go with this one for you. This is a very interesting one. Uh, babyface or heel on Becky Lynch becoming the SmackDown Women's Champion.
Ooh, gosh.
Mm.
This was hard because at the beginning I would have leaned one way, but
Mm-hmm.
now I'm kind of leaning the other way. So at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning,
Mm-hmm.
I would have leaned towards heel because I wasn't a fan of, her winning at SummerSlam like that. I felt like they could have done a better job building up. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like all you needed was the appearance. You definitely did not to have the title win
Mm-hmm.
at SummerSlam. But as just over the past few weeks, I'm leaning more towards babyface because man, is she coming out as this good heel, and I think a perfect foil for Bianca Belair because if she doesn't have Sasha Banks around, if she doesn't have Bailey around, granted there are other women on the SmackDown women's roster that you definitely need to put up there, like Selena Vega, Carmella need their airtime, period. And they could be great feuds. However, there is money in the chase, figuratively, as far as Bianca Belair, it is their, one of their top baby faces in the entire company, especially on SmackDown. So how do you keep the storyline interesting? By throwing in, one of the baddest women in all of pro wrestling. So I'm now leaning more towards babyface only because I'm starting to get it. I get it, WWE. I could see the long-term storytelling in this, and I'm not completely mad at you anymore.
I get it. Okay, I respect that. I like, that was the tweener answer right there a little bit.
That
So
was
I
the
got
tweener
you.
answer.
You
Yes,
gave me the
there was
tweener answer.
there was a progression, just like in wrestling. When anything gives you emotions, you go through this emotional process with it. And sometimes wrestling gives me emotions where I have to process my feelings and sit in it for a second and then be okay with it.
Be okay with it. Yeah, it's one of those things, and I usually allow a tweener answer from
Okay.
time to
So did I
time.
use my
So
one tweener answer for this?
you used your
Okay.
tweener answer really well. Okay, so I'll give you that. Now, here's a baby face or heel question that I really have to let out to you. I got to know how you feel about this one, ladies and gentlemen. Baby face or heel on Bryan Danielson and Brock Lesnar, both rocking the ponytail and beard Viking like look.
Mhm. I'm gonna go babyface on that. I mean, style's style, and I can't help that these both of these men have decided to rock, such a strong look. They're doing them, they're making it cool again. And if that's especially when you put Brock Lesnar and Bryan Danielson in the same sentence like that, you usually don't have them in the same sentence anymore.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're still rocking their own thing, hey, I can appreciate fashion in whatever form it comes in.
Yeah.
And I'm digging it. I'm digging it. I don't care. I'll dig it. I don't care what the consensus is. If you don't like it, that's not my problem.
There you go. There you go. Okay. All right. So, all right then. So, okay. Well, I'm gonna definitely do this one because I've heard a lot of stuff in the streets. Okay. So we're gonna do this one. I'm just gonna
Okay.
ask: are
So,
you going babyface or heel on the Hardy family faction in AEW?
ooh, babyface or heel. You know what? I feel this is a tough one because I have an appreciation for this. Is not a tweener answer. I'm just saying why it's a hard one. But you know what? I think I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go heel on this one. I feel like they're getting lost in the sauce. I feel like the family, the fact that they've expanded to the family when it was just, a business group to begin with, is to me, maybe they're losing a little bit of the meaning behind it. Maybe too much is too much. And you got to home back into, maybe a selective few. So I'm going to go heel on it now you know, just because I definitely, for me, factions are important. Like I grew up watching factions, and you know, I think sometimes less is more. When you have too many members, you become the corporate ministry, and then you don't know what you're doing anymore. And
Ooh,
so,
the
you
corporate
know,
ministry.
the corporate ministry.
Wow,
Granted,
that
they were only, that's a throw, yes.
do they hold the record for the largest faction in wrestling history right now?
I was gonna say probably not. The NWO had some,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
you know what? That
the
was
NWO had like two limos full of people. And then
Jesus, you're
essentially,
right.
if you want to go through all of the Bullet Club, you know, iterations, because I feel like that
Yeah,
at this point the Bullet Club takes it because there's so many subsets of the Bullet Club. So like the
this is
pure
true.
Bullet Club, no, but like the subsets of the Bullet Club, yes.
That is true. Bullet Club does have a yeah. You know there are some factions that can kind of rival corporate ministry. Now that I think about it, it just
Mm-hmm.
seems so deep. That,
Yes.
you
But
know,
also you just start to have so many people and you don't know what they're doing this all for. And I feel like you lose a little bit of the meaning of a faction of a group.
yeah, I totally agree. That's a good answer. I'm glad you didn't go tweener with that one. That's a good answer. I was
Ah.
expecting you to go that route. I'm not gonna lie. I
Well,
was expecting it.
I again, like I totally, you know, these are just, you know, my thoughts. I understand if, you know, there's someone could convince me another way, you know, if they come
Mhm,
up with a pretty good explanation. But from what I see and
mhm.
just that evolution, like I don't know. And but I feel that way for a lot of things in AEW actually. Like
Yeah.
once a faction either grows or you just don't really know what their purpose is, I get
Mhm,
very disconnected from them and I don't know what their I just don't know what their purpose is anymore, you know?
mhm,
So like right now, Team Taz, like they're super still fairly disjointed.
mhm.
Even though they lost Brian Cage and Ricky Starks is still around, but I still don't, you know, and especially someone led by Taz, like you would think they'd have a
Mhm.
defined purpose. I don't really know what their purpose is right now, other than to, you know, fight CM Punk. Like I feel like they deserve much better. They know they could
Yeah.
do so much better.
We shall see. The CM Punk is the test of time of how things turn out for Team Task going forth. But so far, okay, my final scenario for you in this segment would be one of probably the best for last, actually, in a way. I'm gonna say NXT 2.0. After seeing
Oh,
what it finally looks like after weeks and weeks of build up, you going babyface or you going heel with what you've seen so far
mhm.
within 1 week of the new
Yeah.
direction of NXT 2.0?
I'm gonna go babyface. I'm not mad at it. I am not mad at the new NXT 2.0. I can't. I mean, the changes are pretty big with the new venue, new logo, new color scheme, you
Mm-hmm.
know, new focus on talent. And it's a little bit of a mix of, you know, going into the future, but also reflecting on the past as being a true, you know, quote unquote developmental.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't be mad at it because I feel like they're incorporating some really unique elements as far as, you know, the promos at the beginning of this week in preparation for the main event of that four-way for the NXT championship. Um, and there's a lot more, you know, character development in there, which definitely reminds me of like NXT of old, you know,
Mm-hmm.
when you had, you know, trios and factions and people developing who their characters are. I think the big difference is that some of these people are people that we're familiar with, like a Frankie Monet, who, you know, we've seen all over. We know who she is if you know her, but there are a good, you know, portion of the audience who still doesn't know Frankie Monet, but the character she is now is very much in line with, you know, who she's been for quite some time. So I do understand that NXT is built for a different audience. But I do love this focus of bringing truly developing new talent. And I think it's a big shift for people who, at one point, you know, NXT was really bringing in those indie darlings. You know, when you had to take over and you saw, you know, one of those bigger independent stars in the crowd there, you knew they were going to be next. But now that WWE is aligning their focus on really homegrown talent from, you know, the very beginning, you know, that's their choice, that's their prerogative, and to have NXT line up with that makes complete sense. So I think the presentation is still good.
Mm-hmm.
I think the potential for good matches is still good. You know, I am cautiously optimistic about NXT 2.0, but I'm not mad at this.
Mhm.
So I think it's babyface.
All right, you heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. That wraps it up for that segment that you know you love. I know you love it. That's why I bring it to y'all, man. Babyface or heel, sponsored by Heels, quote unquote. Yeah, ladies and
Quote
gentlemen,
unquote.
stars, hit me up. You already know where to find me.
Yes.
That being said, Miss Miranda Morales, to the people listening out there, and of course watching when they see this on the YouTube, tell the people where they can find you, follow you, keep up with you, and also, this is your the chance to promote what you got going on.
Yes, yeah. Oh, there's a lot, so I'm gonna try and just do this as smooth as possible.
The
But
floor is
as
yours.
with podcasting, you can find me on three different amazing sites. Of course, my first home is thechairshot.com, which is your source for wrestling news, analysis, opinions, sports, entertainment, and sports entertainment.
Mhm.
So I am on two podcasts there, the Babyface Heel podcast and the hashtag Miranda Show. Those drop each and every week on thechairshot.com. I am also featured at luchacentral.com with the Lucha Central weekly podcast. Lucha Central is your centralized place for all things Lucha Libre. So we discuss everything happening in the world of Lucha Libre, both in the United States and in Mexico each and every week. That drops about every Friday to Saturday on luchacentral.com. And I work with Big Gold Belt Media on the Impact Wrestling Review, where we discuss the hot topics happening in Impact Wrestling with Najir Chambers. And that's at biggoldbelt.com. And those happen pretty frequently on Fridays as well. And then as far as my social media, well, you can find me at the hashtag Miranda, hashtag spelled out, on Instagram and Facebook. I am not on Twitter, and that is on purpose. I am not on Twitter. I have seen Twitter. It is not for me, but you can find me at the hashtag Miranda on Instagram and Facebook. Facebook in particular highlights a lot of the promotions that I work with out here in Arizona, Nevada, and in California, and also hopefully more to come in the future. So go ahead and follow me on social media, check out those websites, and more than happy and would love to have you come out to one of the shows out here on the West Coast.
Oh, absolutely. I was actually just out in the West Coast not too long ago. I was there in Las Vegas a few weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Just enjoying the festivities and everything.
Good.
Just a little getaway for a while, and definitely gonna have to come out. I know Arizona. I have family out that way. I definitely have to make my way to the West Coast again pretty soon. So I know for sure I will be connecting with you. I will be connecting with some
Yes.
shows going on in the area when I get out that way for sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, you already know. Follow Miss Miranda Morales. Trust me when I say these are, how did my boy Ja Rule and Fat Joe said? What did they say? Yesterday's hits, today's price is not tomorrow's price. Something like that. Something along those lines. Tomorrow's price, yeah, something along those lines. So all
Hmm.
I'm gonna say is today's stars are tomorrow's stars. Okay, so just know the person you see on the screen, know right here, right now, you could be seeing them anywhere in the future on the bright lights. You know what I mean? So
You never know.
just know where you found her right here on the Life's a Botch podcast. If this is your first time
Yes, Tim.
getting introduced to Miss Morales, just know you heard her here first on the Life's a Botch podcast, baby, where it's not about how you botched. It's not about why you botched. It's the fact that you botched. So I just want to say, you already know where to find your boy, the Life's a Botch podcast on Instagram, working on getting a TikTok for Life's a Botch podcast. So y'all stay tuned. I'll let y'all know when that's official with some dope videos coming your way. And of course, we're working on a dope YouTube show sponsored. I can't quite tell y'all that yet. It's still in the works, but it's a dope YouTube
Oh,
show
okay.
that's going to be coming for the Life's a Botch podcast. But you can follow all things OTS right here where the Life's a Botch podcast is being uplifted through the brand that uplifts the brand in the OTS brand man store. You can find so many other dope shows. If you're into music, if you're into sports, if you're into fashion, so many gaming, just so many different things. You can find those and more at otsguys.com, www.otsguys.com. Your boy has some wrestling articles on there. You know, I wrote a nice article about the
Nice.
AEW All Out. You can check that out on the article section of the otsguys.com website. More articles coming from yours truly in the future as well. But nonetheless, man, follow the YouTube, subscribe, OTS guys on YouTube and all things OTS. We thank you guys so much for joining us. And of course, as we like to say, ladies and gentlemen, too sweet. Peace.